That tripod socket, I got most of the glue and the filth off the tripod socket and off the surround. I've got the remains of the two broken off screws in there. Now they're sticking up above the surface, and if I cut a slot in the top, I can probably get a screwdriver on there and turn them out. At least that's what I hope. So here I have a jeweler's file, specially made for doing tasks like cutting slots into screws. I'll see if I can get this to work for me. No, it's not happening. I'm going to have to drill that out. What about its mate over here? That's not looking very promising either. These screws may have potentially come out quite easily previously, but of course with all that terrible glue that's been spread out on this, they may well be glued in position now. See, that one should turn by rights, but it's not. No, I'm going to have to drill those out and run a tap into them. If I get a drill bit run down through them, that may well remove them anyway. They may well drive straight out. I'll try that. I'll try drilling in from this side and seeing if those screws will just simply turn out when the drill bites. I think this is going to work for me. I could really do with a smaller drill bit than that, but I think that I may have one. These are carbide bits. They're made for drilling circuit boards. They are very, very, very sharp, but they are very, very brittle. Well, I'm drilling through that screw. It's not unscrewing. Yeah, it's come out. It did bite and it did unscrew, and the thread in there is still intact. So now I've got to try it doing its mate. So two things are happening here. I'm drilling through the screw, which of course weakens the screw, and the drill bit is likely to grab the screw and turn it, twist it, effectively unscrewing it. And this was the clean end of the screw. This was the end of this, the underside of this bracket. The screw head would have been on the other side. The snapped off piece would have been on the other side. And I'm watching this to make sure that I'm in the centre of the screw, which is brass. I don't want to see any aluminium coming out on my drill bit. That would mean I'd wandered off centre and was cutting into the bracket. Now the other screw loosened up and came out fairly early in the piece. This one's not. Just flipping that over to see if I can see any sign of deformation on the other side of the screw, which would tell me I was about to break through. Oh, it's just breaking through now. I could feel that. That screw doesn't want to turn. The drill bit's biting. If the drill bit grabs, I'm likely to shatter the drill bit. The drill bit's gone right through. The screw's still stuck in there. I'll try a different drill bit. I'll look for a high-speed steel bit. The advantage of using a high-speed steel bit in this particular case is that the bit is likely to be less brittle. And I'm hoping it'll grab that screw and drive it out. No, it's not. I've drilled a bigger hole through the screw, but some of it's still stuck in the threads by the looks of it. I'll have to clear that with a tap. I think that's pretty much clear now. Well, I've spent some time cleaning up the camera body, getting rid of all the grit and rubbish that was in there, and it's looking pretty clean and tidy. So that camera body is ready to be put back into service. You can see that I was able to get off the vast bulk of that nasty adhesive that was stuck on there. I don't know what that glue was. It was nothing good, but I did get it off. Now this piece, I got the screws out of there, the stubs of the screws. I've run a tap through there to clear that hole and that second one that I got out, and I've cleaned up all these components to get rid of all that glue, and surprise, surprise, they go back together nicely now. So the tripod socket wasn't mushroom bell-mouthed out as I suspected. This was simply gluing. It was the glue that had been used to stick this in place because somebody had sheared those screws off. Now, how did they come to shear the screws off? Well, the most likely explanation for that was that somebody had the camera mounted on a tripod, screwed it up nice and tight, and then twisted the camera. Your friction area would be on this outside rim here. That's the area of maximum friction against the top of the tripod. And twisting it, well, that would simply just shear that off. I think that's most likely what happened. I don't even know. Certainly the screws had been sheared off, and looking at the way they sheared off, it certainly goes along with the idea that there was a twisting moment there and that effectively sheared those screws off. So that's back together. That brought me to the next problem, which was the screws. The screws used on the Retina 1A and 2A are very short. These are 1.4mm diameter screws. Similar screws are used on the Retina 3C models, but in the Retina 3C the screws are much longer, and that in itself isn't a problem because you can always cut the length of them down, and I will be doing, but the thread just doesn't run all the way up, so I've had to run these through a die to thread these two screws so they'll extend far enough, the thread extends far enough to tighten up. So I've got two screws there. One of them at least I will have to shorten. The other one I probably won't need to. But that's the deal with that part. Anything else? Well, there's this, of course, the film advance lever. I was able to find an end of film catch in my parts, just the one. I've got 3 of them sitting there in my parts bins loose. 2 of them are cracked through at this point. This is the whole one. This is good. Now I've still got to find the spring that goes in here. There's a spring that goes through here around that post there and back to this point. And that keeps tension on that thing to keep it swung inwards. So I've got to search through my springs and find one that'll do that job. I've probably got one there. It's just a matter of searching through a million tiny springs until I find one that's the right shape. But that's certainly doable. That can be put back together. That probably explains why there was no leatherette on the top of this piece, because that had been removed in order to gut this, and so the original leatherette, which would have looked like this piece, was missing. This is a fairly rough looking piece of leatherette, but I can tell you once that's glued back down in that recess and that odd thread there is cut off, it'll look just like I bought one. So I've got that to deal with. Anything else of note? Probably not especially. The struts cleaned up quite well. You can see that the rust patches that were visible here are somewhat reduced. Most of that was really just on the surface, didn't amount to anything at all. There's these marks here, they're scrape marks. Now they will have been from the focus scale ring, which I haven't cleaned yet, and you can see the state of that. It would have been from this, rubbing on that surface. And one of the reasons it would have been rubbing on that surface was that the focus mount here, which I still haven't cleaned, the 4 screws that held that in position were slightly loose, which allows that mount to fall back, which means that these two surfaces would rub together. And rub together they have, and you can see there's ingrained filth and grit here, and that would match these patches here and here. Because when you're moving the focus, you're moving it at this side, the pressure would be mostly on that side, not so much on this side. So that's the story with that. Apart from that, this all seems to move quite smoothly. There was a lot of visible rust on here. That disappeared. It must have been just fine surface rust, and I cleaned this in the ultrasonic cleaner, and that fine surface rust is mostly just blasted away. It's gone. There's still rust in here, but it's by no means a problem, not even visually. So the struts are ready to go back in. That should be quite good. Looking at it in its entirety, I can certainly put the camera back together. The top cover, well, its shortcomings are cosmetic. It looked pretty lumpy and bumpy with corrosion here. I've cleaned all that away. As you can see, it's eaten through the chrome, which is what you'd expect. It wasn't the chrome that was corroded, the corrosion was of the base metal underneath, which in this case is brass. I'm pretty sure that's all brass. Same here, and up here, the same thing. So this will never be a thing of beauty, but the corrosion's all cleaned away. The surfaces are as clean as they're ever going to be, and perhaps more importantly, I've had the viewfinder apart and cleaned it to the state where you can actually see through it now. That was probably the filthiest viewfinder I've seen in a long time. But that's good to go. I had to straighten up the accessory shoe. That had been stretched, which is not uncommon. There's 2 ways that an accessory shoe gets abused and pulled out of shape. One is if somebody forces in something with a larger size shoe, larger size foot on it than this shoe will accommodate. Electronic flashes often fall into that category. And the other is if somebody's got something fitted here and then they drop the camera and all the load transmits through the flash or the accessory rangefinder or whatever it was that they had fitted to it, and transmits to the frame of this shoe and distorts it out of shape. So it's one of those 2 causes. We'll never know now. This camera's had well over 65 years to hide its secrets. So I'll start assembling things, I think. I'll start here by putting the bellows, the struts back in, folding struts mechanism. Now this spring, this is not in wonderful condition. It's certainly got surface rust on it. I'm applying a bit of grease to this. Just to keep the oxygen away, give it the best chance of surviving. The struts are here. I'm going to apply a bit of molybdenum paste to this rail that the release runs on, and in here where it runs on the rail in the camera body, just rub that with a bit of molybdenum paste too. Back to this, we need our shaft, the transfer shaft that carries the action from the cocking rack through to the shutter. I'll just apply some synthetic grease to that and hook that into position. There. There's a bracket that holds that in position. It's this little bracket. It has to sit down there, and that bracket is secured by the struts. It's trapped between the struts mechanism and the camera body. So I've got to get this in without disturbing that. I'll lubricate the slots at the back of the struts, but I won't lubricate the slots at the front at this stage because that'd be a waste of time. I'd only end up rubbing it away with my fingers while I'm working. So I've got to get this on. This has to go over that post. It goes that way on. I've got to drop these struts down over the bellows and get them under that bracket, which I've just failed to do because it's fallen out of position. See if I can get it back where it came from. No, its shaft's fallen out now. Let's start again. That's in position. Okay, I've got those struts down in position. Make sure they're latched up. Now I can't see the hole going through the bracket, so something's moved. There it is. Okay, that's the hole lined up. Now I've got 4 black screws. We want 2 pretty ones to stay in the film cassette chamber. The ugliest one goes at the bottom of the camera, under the leatherette. And we'll put that in place next. Now in the same relative position as we've got the bracket at the top, we have a spacer washer at the bottom of the camera. It goes between the struts mechanism and the body casting. So I'm just getting that positioned. I think I've achieved it. The leatherette's not looking happy. And the ugliest of the 4 screws can go in there. These are black screws, these ones. Alright, so that's in place. Now I haven't done either of those screws up tight at this stage because that would be counterproductive. 2 more screws go in here in the film cassette well. So I've got to get them in, and these should be the prettier of the 4 screws because people can see these. Or could do if they knew where to look. Alright, I've got my 4 screws in place now, so I can do them up tight. I'll do up the 2 in the film cassette well, one on the top and one at the bottom. That's my struts back in place. And they slide down neatly. You can see the transfer shaft comes up through that hole in the front there. Alright, I think I can get the... I'm concerned about this leatherette at the base of the camera. It's ugly, and it's only going to get more ugly the longer it's flapping in the breeze. So I'm not going to do the focus stuff now as I normally would do. I'm going to get the film advance underway instead. Now the film advance shaft here, I'm going to lubricate that with some graphite grease. This is particularly good. It's quite tacky. It'll stay where it's put to a large extent. I need it to stay down between the bush and the shaft. It's very good at doing that. I'll put some on the spring so that the coils of the spring wind over each other smoothly as that's winding up. This metal bush goes into the base of the film cassette, the take-up spool rather, and the take-up spool can be dropped into the camera. The film advance shaft can go in. Now generally I position these with the slot in this flange pointing towards the end of the camera. Not that it makes an awful lot of difference, but that's just the convention. Now just making sure I've got the spring all seated correctly. It looks like I have. There are 3 fixing screws. I'll get these in place. So I'm running a race against time here because the video camera's giving me the flashing battery symbol. So I can see I've got that out 1/3 of a turn from where I said I was going to put it. Let's put it back where I want it. Right, 3 screws are in place. I can tighten them up. Check that the shaft moves, rotates smoothly. Open it at the back, make sure that the take-up spool is down over that spring. No arguments, nice and smooth. Everything's moving nicely. That's good. Now for the next bit.